In this section, we're just going to take a look at our Android file hierarchy. This is all going to be found within our project window here, and I'm going to be looking at everything from an Android-specific view. You can actually change the way you look at your entire file hierarchy simply by selecting different items here. I find the Android one gives me easy access to the files that I use most often. And that being said, we're going to focus again mostly on those files that we use on a day-to-day basis, rather than the ones that we don't use so much. For example, in our Gradle scripts folder, there are several different files here, but I only ever really find myself modifying this particular one. So, like I said, we'll kind of brush over the ones that we don't use so often. So we might as well actually get started by opening up all of our directories here. Let's just open them all up, and then we can kind of go into each individual one in greater detail. So don't bother opening up these ones. We just are going to take a few minutes to explain what those are. So let's start up right at the very top here. So this is our main project directory. This is where most of the main files are found within the app folder. And then within our Gradle scripts, these are all of our Gradle files. Okay, so Gradle files are kind of used to help specify dependencies for the project. For example, like I said, this is typically the one that we modify if any of them. This is the second build.gradle file module app. And again, this is just a way to specify stuff like compile SDK version, target SDK versions. It's a way to add other dependencies to our project. For example, I often use constraint layouts because I find it's a very responsive type of layout to build my layout files. I'll explain what that means a little bit later, but as you can see, I do need an extra support import for that. So I have this extra line of code here that just gives me access to that. Similarly, if we want to access other UI elements or just general dependencies that aren't with a default package, we typically have to do something like add an implementation or add a dependency of some kind. Okay, so the Gradle files are really just a way to bring all of the dependencies together in such a way that allow our projects to take every file into account. So generally speaking, if we import extra assets or extra UI elements or something like this, we often have to modify this Gradle file. It's usually pretty easy, and whenever we need to do that in a project, then I will generally walk you through that process. Assuming, of course, you're watching our tutorials. So in our next folder, we're going to have our manifests. If we just take a quick look at our manifest XML file, this is again just a way to specify certain project dependencies. Not only this, it gives us a lot of information about how the project itself is going to run. So for example, it gives us an icon. If we want to customize which icon is displayed on our device, then this is a way to do so. Gives us ways to specify the overall theme, which activity is the first one. In our case, it's just the main activity, and every other activity that we add is kind of added to this hierarchy. And if we have any extra dependencies that we need, or I guess permissions would be a better word, that we need in our app, this is typically where we specify them. For example, let's say our app needs access to the internet, or perhaps it needs access to location. It's a maps-focused app. In that case, we do need to provide the dependency or the permission in some kind of XML format within this Android manifest file. Okay, so really it's just a way to specify dependencies and permissions. Okay, so that's what that's for. Again, if we ever need to modify that, I'll walk you through the process, as sometimes it's a little unintuitive. Just keep in mind this is typical XML code. So within Java, this is where most of our main project files go. And when I say that, I mean stuff like the activity files, any kind of classes or objects that we create, all of the actual layout files themselves go in resources. I'll get back to that in a couple of minutes. So if you'll note, our main activity.kt, it's a Kotlin extension, is actually found within our Java and our Intro to Android package here. So the next couple of packages just hold unit tests. Well, this one's unit test, this one's an instrumented test. We generally don't delve into those. If you do like to write your own code tests, this is where you put them, in these two folders here. Generally speaking, if I do feel the need to write unit tests, I will write them. And if I ever feel like when we're developing an app, we need to write unit tests, I will again walk you through that process. But generally speaking, we write our own tests within the code, and as long as you cover all of the possible cases, you don't need to get so much into unit tests. However, excellent tool, we don't cover them too much though. So right now we only have the one activity or class file that's found in our general Intro to Android package here. Again, this is the one that's currently open. So this is again where all of our code files go. If we had Java files, we can create new files here. If we had Kotlin files, again, they'd go here. We can separate them into different packages, and actually we can put different files in different packages throughout the app if we want in different locations. This is generally just where we would like to put them though. Helps keep things organized. And on that note, if we do want to create a new file, you can actually go to the File menu, select a new file this way. But the better way, I personally think, is by specifying the directory directly by selecting it, right-clicking it, and then selecting a new file this way. So we can add stuff like Java class, Kotlin file, or class. If you just want, let's say, a text file, you'd probably go to different file type down here. If we want a new activity type file, which I'll explain the meaning of in a couple minutes, we would go down to activity, and then we would specify a different activity here. Okay, so let's ignore the concept of activity. I'd like to revisit that in greater detail in a little bit. Okay, so we've seen the test project or the test directories, so let's close those guys up, and now we can open up our resources folder. Now resources contains a lot of different categories. It contains some drawables, there's the layout files, bitmap values, and then just some other values here. We have colors, strings, and styles. So to start off with, our drawable folder contains anything that pertains to drawable files. So if we need to specify certain backgrounds through XML, we typically put them in here. If we want to import images into our project, generally speaking, I like to put them in my drawable folder, although you can put them in an assets folder or something like that. But just keep in mind, this is generally specifying drawable attributes or drawable files. The layout folder is where all of our layout files go. So we have activity_main. If we just take a quick look at this and go to design down here, this is kind of a way to design our device screens. In our case, our device screen only has the one item, which is a text view, just a way of displaying some static text. Again, I'll explore this file in greater detail in a little bit. In fact, I think I'll devote next section to exploring this activity and layout file relationship, and then we'll go into each in greater detail. So again, this is just a way to design how our device screens are going to look. So in a multi-page application, you'll end up with multiple layout files. And each file is going to be used to display either an entire screen or some kind of aspect of a screen. Okay, so this is just what the default screen looks like. By the way, for every activity that we create, we have the option of creating a layout file, and typically we do because of that layout activity relationship. Okay, bitmap values are just a way to store certain images. A lot of these default ones have to do with the icons. So if we open these guys up, you can see there are various icon sizes. Generally speaking, it's a better idea to have multiple sizes for your icons. And this is, again, just a directory where we put all of those. For the most part, unless we are developing a full application from start to finish, as in to be released on the App Store, I won't bother talking about the icons themselves. But obviously, if you do want to release a custom application to the App Store for everyone else to download, you'll probably want it to be as polished as possible and then add some icons in here. So this is where they go in our bitmap folder. So final one is going to be values. Now values is divided into three items. There is the colors.xml, strings, and then styles. So I find myself using colors and strings, but not styles so much. Colors is just a way to preset some colors. So we specify these by RGB codes, with the first two values being red, the second values being green, and then the third values being blue. We can create new resources by doing something like this, color, name, and then providing a name. Let's say we wanted pure black or something. Okay, and then we specify the color based on a hashtag, and then we could specify just a pure black. In this case, 6 zeros represents pure black. Let's say we wanted pure white. Then we could do something like this, okay? In our XML files, and actually throughout the code, we can usually use these literal values, but Android Studio encourages us, and it is generally better practice, to create these resources. So be that colors, or if we wanted strings as well. It's always better to create a string resource. For example, my app name is just intro to Android, this string here. It's better to do things this way and then call upon the resource in code rather than just using a string literal. So by a string literal, I mean something like this. We could say string, or actually this is Kotlin, isn't it? Val string1 is equal to, and then just some garbage value. So it's usually better to create a string resource rather than create a string this way, unless it needs to be modified. So if we know, particularly this is useful when setting UI element text. For example, if I wanted to at some point change, where is it, this guy's text view, if I wanted to change the text, I'd probably create some kind of a string resource, if possible, and then use that rather than just creating some string literal through the code. Okay, so again, just a way to specify resources, and styles is a very similar thing, except that this refers to entire styles rather than just a single color, a single string resource, so on and so forth. Okay, so those are your main files that you'll use. I guess I showed you a little bit about the Gradle script, but certain other Gradle files are used to, again, just specify dependencies. Generally, we don't modify this one too much. Like I said, most of the modification happens within this file here. Also note that if you open this guy up, if you change anything within our project structure, for example, I'm using 27 and I explicitly said I would be. If I used, let's say, 25 or 26, maybe change a compile SDK version, you will see those changes reflected in here. Likewise, if you make the changes here, you'll see the changes reflected in that project structure window which I just brought up. Alright, so that just about covers all I wanted to cover in terms of the file hierarchy. Like I said, there are lots of different ways to view it. You can view a project view. I just find this way a little bit more confusing to navigate. See, I find the Android one a little cleaner because it presents me the files that I use on a most regular basis. So check those out a little bit. Play around with maybe creating new files. Like I said, in order to do that, you just select the package you want, right click, select a new file, and then there are a bunch of different ones to choose from. Package if you do want kind of like a directory, or yeah, I guess the package is probably better than the data directories. You can also create C or C++ files, image assets or image vectors, and then like I said, a variety of different activities, fragments. If you want stuff like maps, then you can go to Google and it provides stuff like this. And so there's just a ton of diversity there. So in the next section, I'm just going to take a closer look at, or I guess we are going to take a closer look at our main activity file and our activity_main.xml. So I'm going to spend most time talking in the text version rather than the design version. We'll talk about the relationship, exactly what these two files are used for, and how they contribute to the overall project.